Thank you, Vice Chair. Your Excellencies, I am honored to speak to you today to highlight the crucial role of the Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, CERD, in advancing Indigenous peoples' rights. For centuries, Indigenous peoples have suffered systemic discrimination, exclusion, and human rights violations. We continue to be denied access to justice, dispossessed of our lands, and marginalized in decision-making processes. While the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, ICERD, was adopted in 1965 without explicitly mentioning Indigenous peoples, CERD has consistently affirmed that racial discrimination against Indigenous peoples is a serious violation of human rights that requires urgent action. As we commemorate 60 years of the Convention, we must also look ahead to 2027, which marks two major anniversaries for Indigenous rights. First, it is the 30th anniversary of CERD's General Recommendation 23 on Indigenous peoples, adopted in August 1997. While only 5 paragraphs long, General Recommendations 23 was an early affirmation of various foundational rights. These include our rights to our territories, to our lands, to restitution, to free, prior, and informed consent, and to various cultural rights, which are articulated within the system of fundamental non-discrimination and equality norms. This was an early and very welcome validation of the equality and equal rights of all peoples as set out in the Charter of the UN, guarantees that long denied Indigenous peoples. Second, 2027 is also the 20th anniversary of the adoption of the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. After many years of discussion, the General Assembly adopted this declaration recognizing the equal rights and dignity of Indigenous peoples, including our right to self-determination. CERD's General Recommendation 23 was often cited in the discussions around the declaration, and since 2007, CERD often refers to the declaration in its concluding observations, general recommendations, urgent actions, and communications, and decisions. It has affirmed that the standards in the declaration are consistent with the human rights guarantees in the Convention. While the Convention, adopted in 1965, makes no reference to Indigenous peoples, the CERD has been clear as it applies to Indigenous peoples, and that the failure to guarantee, respect, and protect our rights is discriminatory. To achieve this, it has adopted detailed recommendations consistently for over 30 years, including under its much appreciated early warning and urgent action procedure in several important recent decisions pursuant to Article 14 complaint procedure. These recommendations include the need to recognize our collective land rights, the need to prevent forced eviction of Indigenous peoples, challenging racial discrimination in resource extraction, addressing violence against Indigenous defenders, and the need to implement the free, prior, and informed consent of Indigenous peoples. In 2018, I was part of the urgent action decision, so I understand the importance of CERD to victims of human rights violations. Further, CERD's General Recommendation number 25, issued in 2000, acknowledged the intersectional discrimination, both racial and gender-based oppression, experienced by Indigenous women. In 2022, SEDAW built on this, adopting General Recommendation number 39, which specifically addresses the need to recognize and protect the interrelated individual and collective rights of Indigenous women and their collective rights as part of Indigenous peoples. Third, has called for stronger measures to combat violence, discrimination, and economic exclusion faced by Indigenous women across the globe. Likewise, third has illuminated the challenges of eradicating racial discrimination and ensuring tangible equality for Indigenous peoples, which remains evident still in many situations. However, I have no doubt that third will continue to raise concern and make recommendations to states to support them to address this problem. Since it was adopted in 1997, third has developed a large body of practice that goes beyond the short but valuable statements in General Recommendation 23. It was also approved prior to the adoption of the Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples in 2007. I hereby strongly urge third to take the next step by developing an updated General Recommendation on Indigenous Peoples to reflect the past 30 years of progress and respond to the current challenges that we face. The updated recommendation shall consider the following. First, integrate the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples as a key reference. Second, strengthen the legal obligation of states to protect Indigenous peoples' lands and resources, cultures, and self-governance. Third, address the increasing threats of climate change, extractive industries, and land dispossession. And fourth, provide clear guidance on ensuring Indigenous peoples' participation in decision-making, including by Indigenous women. This step will provide a much-needed legal and policy framework for states to uphold their obligations under the Convention and protect Indigenous peoples' rights more effectively. We stand ready to support third in this crucial endeavor. Thank you.